Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on coaches, speakers, authors, leaders of nonprofits who are also passionate about putting God back in business. And it's no different this week. Welcome back to another episode for our Tools and Resources series, where we deep dive on things that help you in your personal and or professional life, things that you can immediately implement today. And folks, I've got to tell you, this individual, even though I've recently gotten to know her a little bit more, the very first time I heard her speak in a church setting, I was captivated with the topic. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of wisdom and nuggets dropped today. Before I bring her on, let me introduce her to you. My goodness, folks, I'm excited. Dr. Chinwe is a highly regarded and trusted keynote and workshop facilitator known to be knowledgeable, competent, and warm. As a board certified and dedicated mental health professional, Dr. Williams is an authority on topics relating to stress, anxiety, and burnout, trauma resolution, intersection of faith, culture, and mental health, youth, young adult, and women's wellness. She is a licensed professional counselor, a board certified counselor, and a counselor, educator, and supervisor, and a certified EMDR therapist. Folks, if there's a letter, she has it, and God has graced her to do a great work. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life podcast, Dr. Chinwe Williams. Dr. Chinwe, how are you doing today?
I am amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Dr. Chinwe, today we are going to deep dive generally on the topic of mental health, but specifically, folks, Dr. Chinwe co-authored a phenomenal book, and it is just a wonderful book. I've read it myself, but it's called Seen: Healing Despair and Anxiety in Kids and Teens Through the Power of Connection. So we're going to deep dive on that. There'll be some really good takeaways that you can implement today. We all know how we feel about our children and the youth. Trust me, after today, you're going to be able to help a young person. Dr. Chinwe, let's get into your book that you wrote with Scene. For those unfamiliar with your work, can you tell us what inspired you to co-write Scene and focus on mental health of kids and teens?
Absolutely. So, Scene was co-written by myself and youth pastor Will Hutcherson, and I'll share a little bit more about how we got connected very soon. But I really appreciate your question, Brother Jason, because I think that many people still believe that the crisis that we're experiencing among kids, teens, and young adults happened due to COVID. So
Mm,
we all remember 2020. We all have our 2020 stories. Some of us really would prefer to forget 2020, but mental health was on the forefront of many of our conversations. But if you can recall, many families were really worried about their young child, teenagers, young adult who maybe were off to college or college bound and what that experience was going to be like for them. So please let me be clear. COVID did not help youth mental health. COVID actually exacerbated the decline of youth mental health. But as a therapist, I'm also a mental health researcher. I have been a graduate counseling professor for over 10 years. The fact is, we were seeing disturbing trends probably 10 years prior to the COVID pandemic. So,
wow.
mental health among youth was in a crisis state prior to COVID. As a therapist, I started my career. I work with adults. I've done couples work, not so much anymore. I work with a lot of professionals. I work with young adults. But I actually started my career, Jason, as a high school counselor.
Mm,
So I work with students and I also work with families. I even had the opportunity to even counsel teachers on occasion, especially around issues around grief or some critical incident in the school system. So I saw a lot. I saw a lot. I've got to tell you that as a therapist today, working in private practice, and even as a mom, I am observing so many different challenges that young people are experiencing. So I felt compelled. I felt compelled again as a therapist, but also as a mom of three. I've got a 21-year-old, I've got a 14-year-old, I have a 10-year-old. I'm hearing stories. I'm in touch with their friends' parents. I'm connected to the community. So I felt really compelled and really called by the Lord to do my part to equip not just parents, but grandparents, aunties, uncles, ministry leaders, church leaders, anyone that is in a child's orbit, anyone that cares for a child's overall well being to bring practical tools, but also hope and even healing. So that's
Mm.
really how Scene came to be. And it just has taken off in the last 5 years.
Wow. It's an unbelievable work, Dr. Chinwe. Folks, I was fortunate enough to read the book after I heard Dr. Chinwe attend a mutual church service that I was at. I love the topic, so I looked her up and I dove deep and I bought the book. And I have to say, it's very telling. One of the things, Dr. Chinwe, that you get into is patterns and trends. And while there are many, there are two in particular that are on the forefront, and that's anxiety and depression. And I know you and Will talk about it from different angles, but what are you seeing out there today in 2025 with regards to anxiety and depression?
Yeah. So when I started my career as a high school counselor, depression was the number one or most common mental health condition experienced by young people. Today in 2025, anxiety is the number one mental health condition among young people and also among adults. So I know this
Mm,
conversation is pertaining to young people, but I also am very much connected to the people that care for young people, right? The adults. And so 40 million adults in our country have a bona fide anxiety disorder. So they're not just worried a little bit or need some reassurance or have an occasional panic attack, which feels awful. These are individuals that have such pervasive worry and anxiety that it feels pretty debilitating. So that's the adult population. We know right now that 1 in 5 children or teenagers have experienced some mental health condition, including anxiety and depression. So I often share with people that we as humans are supposed to sometimes feel worried. We as
mm,
humans are going to have bouts of sadness, right? Our moods are going to dip depending on the circumstances that we face. Emotions are going to hit really hard. So you don't have necessarily a diagnosis because you have sadness or you have sometimes worry or anxiety. But if those issues stay for far too long and you don't get the support that you need, and I'm not just talking about professional support, but you don't have that individual, a parent, a caregiver, or a grandparent, a loved one to say, I see you and I want to be able to support you. When you don't have that, those symptoms can actually lead into worsening symptomology or worsening mental health. So we are also seeing disturbing trends around suicide. So we wrote about
mm,
this in the book, and I just want to point out this is a large and scary statistic. So, for those of you who are listening, just want to give you a little bit of warning. This is pertaining to suicide. Since 2007, we're seeing suicide rates increase by 76%, Brother Jason, for young people between the ages of 15 and 19 years old.
wow.
76%. And get this, the highest rate of increase in suicide among all age groups is in kids between the ages of 10 and 14 years old.
My God.
So that is one of the conversations that Will and I had when we were really digging into the data. And I was sharing what I was seeing in my therapy room, and he was sharing what he was seeing working with students and doing assemblies all over the country. And it was shocking. And there is another stat that I will share with your listeners. Again, just take deep breaths and remember that God is omniscient, right? None of this is new to the Lord. But there is a stat that indicates that Black youth, specifically Black boys, Black teenage boys, are experiencing rates of suicide that are outpacing any other racial or ethnic group.
Wow. Mm.
So sad, right?
Yeah.
And again, I started my career, gosh, over 18 years ago in the schools. I saw some of this stuff, but not at the elevated levels that I am seeing clinically and also hearing about as I travel and talk to families across the country.
My goodness. Yeah, Dr. Chinwe, it's easy when, as you stated with the disclaimer, when you hear stats like that, it is alarming and almost even bone.
Really.
What would you say, Dr. Chinwe, was the call to action? So you're observing things as a mental health professional, Will as a youth pastor, and you could have stayed in your respective buckets, but what was the straw that broke the camel's back as we've got to talk about this and maybe even shine the light on what does it even look like for a youth pastor and a mental health professional to come together and
Right.
co-write a book of this nature?
Yeah, this God. It's a God story. So Will and I met through our publishing company, who for years, over 20 years, provided children's curriculum, video
Mm,
curriculum, written curriculum for churches and ministries all over the world. So I got connected with them, gosh, 14 years ago, started blog writing, provided some consultation as they were just beginning to do some work around child development and psychology and integrating that in their training of ministry leaders and volunteers. So that was my part of it. Will is this dynamic speaker as a youth pastor working with teenagers. He was actually doing assemblies all over the country, going into the high school. And I like to joke with him about this. He would bring a DJ with him and get the teachers dancing, get the janitorial staff dancing, get young people dancing, and then open up the question about, do you know anyone in your life that has thought about not being here anymore? And how
mm,
brilliant is that? He became very well known for having those conversations that are taboo, that people don't want to have in the school system as a pastor. And because he was working with the same publishing company, they said, you know what? You guys need to meet. So we got into a room, had a conversation, and this is really the God piece. All of it is. This happened in 2019. And Jason, when we started digging into the research, I was sharing what I was seeing clinically. He was sharing what students were sharing with him after these assemblies. We were like, oh my goodness. Like, we went from concerned to disturbed. This
mm,
was 2019. We began to write down our thoughts. I asked as many young people as I knew, what do you need? What feels supportive when you are getting hit left and center? When life is throwing you all those curveballs, what do you need most?
wow.
What do people like me, your parents, your grandparents, ministry leaders, what do we not understand? Right? What do we need to understand? How do we meet you where you are? And we got information. And a lot of it I was able to just ask the clients that I was seeing, right? And
Mhm.
then the young people that I'm connected with in different ways. And Will did the same thing. And then guess what happened when we started writing the book? COVID hit in
Mm,
2020. And as God would see fit, because God knew this book became so important. It was already important. And I knew it was something that needed to be out there. Brother Jason, this is where I'm going to be very transparent with you. I didn't know if I was the person to write it. I was
mm,
asked to write this book. We were told to meet, have these conversations, and then I thought I was just going to help him as a consultant to do his thing. And they said, no, we want you to co-write this book as the
wow.
professional. And I will tell you, I talked to my husband, I prayed about it, and I was like, Lord, I don't know that I'm the person that's supposed to do this at this time. Maybe this is for this young man to do, right? Do I have something separate that I'm supposed to do for the kingdom? So I wrestled with it and I prayed and I spoke to friends, consulted with wise counsel. So this is what I want to tell all of your listeners, because I know the work that you do, Brother Jason, and the people that are listening to you on Fortified. This book has left a deep impact on communities globally. We are scheduled to be in Senegal, West Africa, talking about seeing. This year, we are scheduled to be in Hong Kong talking about seeing.
Wow.
Next year, and we just got word from Chile. A ministry team in Chile translated the book into Spanish, and it's just been amazing. So, this is what I want to say to the listeners. I know we're talking about youth mental health, but this is for everybody. When we get serious about following the Lord and being obedient, fear will creep in.
Mm.
Fear will creep in. It often does. And fear can be immobilizing. Self doubt can creep in. Not only can fear be immobilizing, worse yet, it can cause us to be disobedient, right? And the enemy's voice will feel really loud. Self doubt will creep in. The task feels too great. The path feels too murky, right? So I just want to encourage everyone who's listening, when God gives you a dream, when God gives you an opportunity, when God opens a door, walk right through, run with it, even with the fear, right? Even with the fear. And you just never know what hangs in the balance of our obedience or lack thereof.
So good, Dr. Chinwe. It was clearly just divinely orchestrated by God. And then the timeliness of none of us knew about the pandemic and COVID-19. So just God has just a wonderful way of knowing what's ahead and what's over the horizon and saying yes. You just never know. And that's huge, just the global impact that the book is having, and you getting to share and just really give us tools on how we can navigate what we're dealing with, which brings up Dr. Chinwe in the book. So for all the listeners, we've talked about anxiety, depression, suicide. One of the things that a lot of folks don't really think about or maybe have language for, Dr. Chinwe, is despair. And so, can you, for a second, because I think when people hear those terms, there's a myriad of emotions that come to play. But in the case of children, can you actually talk about the neuroscience behind what happens in a child's brain during emotional distress? Because I think we're so used to giving nicknames and oversimplifying things that may or may not be happening to us. But can you just talk about what's actually going on in the brain when we feel some of these things, and especially despair, as you touch on
Yes.
in the book?
Yes. And so let me first debunk a myth. Oftentimes we hear of someone who took their own life, ended their own life, and we immediately think that depression is the cause. So, what's
Mm,
interesting when you look at the research, while depression can absolutely play a role, oftentimes that is not the case with young people. It's a feeling of hopelessness combined with isolation, which is my definition of despair. Despair is defined as deep sadness. This is how we
mm,
define it in the book, or a complete absence of hope.
wow.
When I'm talking to parents, I say it's suffering without meaning. Like
Wow.
sometimes as adults, we know that this is a season of drudgery. We're
Mm,
in this work, we're doing this thing, it feels hard, we're staying up late, we're waking up early, but we know that there's a purpose, there's an outcome, there's something that we're hoping will transpire, or we're planting a seed. Suffering without meaning is really hard, right? And so, again, that
wow.
hopelessness and helplessness combined with social disconnection is a dangerous combination for young people whose brains are still developing. So, you asked about the neuroscience. So, this is where I will give a caveat. This is an oversimplification because anybody who has a background in biology or neurobiology or neuroscience, you know that the brain is so complicated. And my husband is a toxicologist. He always reminds me that we only really know the tip of the iceberg of the brain's capabilities. That's God's wisdom, right? That's kudos to our Heavenly Father who has woven our brains in intricate and profound ways. But as it relates to a child who's having a hard time, so we don't even have to go as far as someone who's deeply depressed, but a child who's having a meltdown, a teenager who doesn't have any friends, who feels
Mm,
extreme loneliness. I bring up the example of an adult, which I know several, even in my own community, adults who have lost their jobs this year. And these are brilliant people. And maybe they found another job, but they're underemployed. They have
mm,
income coming in, but it's not the same as what they experienced just months ago when they feel maybe a lack of purpose or they feel like they're not providing for their family in the same way. I have counseled some of these people, and they will say that they feel levels of despair. But when it comes to a child, let me share with you the way that God has wired our brains. We have the left side of the brain, which is where logical processing occurs. So think rational thought, organization, think mathematics, okay? Think arithmetic.
mm.
And then we have the right side of the brain, which is where our emotions get processed. So this is also where a small, tiny structure of the brain called the amygdala lives. So the amygdala, my friends, is the fear center. So think fight, right? Flight,
Mm,
freeze. So when a child is experiencing a long period of anxiety or a long period of despair without support, without relief, what happens is emotional energy gets channeled to the right side of the brain. Blood
mm,
flow, actual blood flow gets channeled to the right side of the brain. And guess what happens? Logical processing begins to decrease. So it's like this mayday emergency, something bad's happening. And it becomes very difficult to say to a child, you're going to be fine. Everything's okay. What do you mean? There's nothing to worry about. You cannot logically process with a child who's in a state of high anxiety or despair. It just doesn't work because their brain is offline. So that's
wow.
what we really try to highlight. And I think that's what's catching on globally because we all have a brain, right? And we all can
Right.
understand that the brain functions again, the way that God has wired our brains. It's intricate, it's profound. So we in the book call it a despairing. When a child is
Mm,
experiencing despair, it's like the left brain and the right brain are not communicating effectively. So therefore, we need to meet our children not with more logic, but with right brain connection. So that's really
mm.
the crux of the entire book. So when you have an emotional response to something, it's very difficult to use logic to calm yourself down. You really need someone to walk alongside you and tell you that they're there and they want to be there and you're going to be okay.
Wow. The brain is so fascinating,
Yes.
Dr. Chinwe. It really is. Dr. Chinwe, so we've outlined the problem and the why behind it with what's happening in the brain. And you said the key central takeaway connection. So you have hopelessness and you have isolation, but then connection is the bridge. So if we're getting practical, Dr. Chinway, you've got by the time that people are listening to this now, you've got the concerned parent, teacher, coach, grandparent, church member, and they go, all right, Dr. Chinway, you've got my attention. How in the world do we help these young people? What are some practical ways that we can provide? As you said, we don't need more logic in those moments. They need to feel connection. What can we possibly do to come alongside our young people and let them know that they're valued, that they're cared for, and that we're here for them? How can we do that?
Yeah, so most lay people who haven't studied psychology may not understand that we all have a inner life. I think people do, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe we don't use that language to explain our thoughts, our emotions, our motivations, our fears. And for many generations, kids we didn't even think about kids having a voice, much less caring about their inner life. It's like, you do as I say, and that's it. Kids are to be seen and not heard. But with the new developments in child development, neuroscience, which is brain science, we're really understanding that kids, especially this generation of children, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, which are middle schoolers, they do have an active, every child, your 3-year-old, 4 has an active inner life and attuning and paying attention. So attuning is a psychological word, by the way, just means paying attention to their internal mental state. They may not have the words to share it. So as adults, who care, we can actually make a lot of interpretations by our observations and then checking in, right? So we don't want to just make an interpretation. We want to check in with them to see what's going on. We see a behavior, but what is it connected to? Is there a need that's not being met? Is there bullying that's happening behind the scenes? When I'm working with parents of teenagers, I know what that teenager has shared with me, but the parent sees them as being maybe disobedient or disrespectful or not doing what they need to do with chores or at school. And I'm thinking, ooh, the shame that this
Wow.
child has been carrying, the pressures, the peer pressure, the things that are going on in their internal life, trying to help the parents to understand that there's so much happening underneath. Okay, so you asked about practical things that we can do, and it's really an important question. So I believe that helping kids to feel seen starts with one, what I just said, understanding that their motivations, their fears, their experiences that they're holding on to. When my 10-year-old acts out, I'm gonna have a reaction just like any other parent. What in the world is going on? Better, I taught you better. But when I have that conversation with him, once his left brain is back online, he'll say things like, Mom, I was embarrassed. What? Mom, I was afraid. Mom, the other kids were moving. He's in a speed and agility class right now to get strength training for basketball season. And he was having an attitude about something. And then when I had a quiet moment with him an hour later, he was like, Gosh, Mom, the kids are so much faster than me. And I'm like, You can't measure yourself. Those of you who are listening who are older, Michael Jordan, if you can't measure yourself, to Michael Jordan as a basketball star when you're just starting out in middle school, right? And so just having that opportunity to connect with him really provided for a teachable moment. But parent, grandparents, teachers, it really starts with building that strong, positive relationship with your child, with your student, responding to not just their physical needs, their academic needs, not just their spiritual needs, ministry leaders, but their emotional needs. If you have access to a child, let's say they're a family member of yours, establish weekly time with that child. If you are a parent, parents are so busy right now, do some sort of shared activity, even 10 to 15 minutes a day, right? A day where you are doing something to connect with that child based on just what their interests are. So it's not something that's obligatory. It's not something that's related to a chore chart. It's something that really engages that child because they're interested in it. So you're actually inviting yourself, or hopefully they're inviting you to get to know them better. Listening more than you talk is huge. As I mentioned, I used to see couples. I don't see a lot of couples right now just because of my schedule, but that it was just fascinating to me when I would meet with couples separately and they would share things that they had never shared with each other. And I would say, does your wife know this? Does your husband know this? And they were a fairly connected couple in most occasions, but they were afraid. So vulnerability and intimacy is with regard to like really opening up and helping people to know your fears, your motivations, your dreams. That's difficult for adults, right?
Yeah.
So we want to prime that with young people by engaging them in conversations and remembering that's not always the time to teach. It's actually
That's
better for
good.
you to truly hear what your child is saying. And remember, and I say this a lot with parents of teenagers, your child may not want you or need you to problem solve. They may just need to be heard and feel accepted. So just be curious.
Wow. Folks, listen, you have the book for sure, but we just got a miniature masterclass in how to help a young person. So, Dr. Chinwe, I felt compelled to write a bunch of stuff down as you were saying it. Just unbelievable. Folks, you heard it directly from her as a licensed professional. So, these are things that we can all do today. Taking interest and paying attention. And I love what you said, Dr. Chimley, the power of observation. Power of observation, not just the stigma that's out there, kids are just being kids. But what if there's the old Transformers? What if there's more than meets the eye?
That's good.
It's more than meets the eye for all of us, but certainly with children. And folks, one of the things you'll see in the book too, Dr. Chenway and Will use case studies. And so they'll present a scenario, and Dr. Chenway, just because we just don't have the time, and hint, we may have her back. I think we should for another episode, but they break down different use cases of, hey, I was working with this child. Here's what we observed, and here's how we put our heads together to really come around and rally around that individual. Dr. Chenway, I love that you had the case study format for doing that. Just as a quick aside, any thought? Because a lot of times, especially when we're talking about things that are psychological and whatnot, what does a case study help us understand in digesting the concept? What does that do when we use case studies?
Yes, it brings sometimes difficult or complicated concepts to life. And
Mm,
secondarily, it makes it relatable. And that's
yes.
really what makes it come to life. So it's interesting, again, what God has done. Will and I have traveled for the past 5 years pretty consistently across the country talking about seeing. And for people who had already read the book, they would share some things as we're signing books at the end of the seminar. And they would say, oh my gosh, this is my story. When you talked about Chloe, that is my kid. When you talked about
Wow.
so and it was as if somebody told on me.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love that. And I think that's also the beauty of what you do, Brother Jason, is like bringing guests on to share their journeys, their stories, their testimonies. Many people are listening thinking, gosh, that sounds like part of my story. So there's a relatability in providing case studies in books and sharing stories just in general.
I love it. The folks, we've got to get ready to land the plane. And I'm telling you, we have not seen the last of Dr. Chinway. But this final question, Dr. Chinway, and we were talking offline about this. Sometimes, or at times, especially in the Christian community, the mental health arena can be taboo. How do we, and how do even you reconcile faith and mental health? There are times where faith gets questioned. Do we have enough faith? Are we believing? And on the other side, sometimes maybe we're so quick to just look to the world to answers, and then we don't pray and go to God. So how do you, and then how do we even reconcile faith and mental health?
Oh, wow. That's such a big question. I point to Jesus in all things, but particularly with regard to your question, when we look at the life of Jesus, the short time but impactful time that he had on this earth, Jesus was God in the flesh, and Jesus
Mhm.
experienced all emotions. And when we talk about our soul, I just want to share, I learned this from my spiritual mother years and years ago. Our soul encompasses our mind, our emotions, and our will. So think behavior. Those are also three components of solid mental health: how we think, our thought life, the intensity in which we experience our emotions, and also how we show up for our community. And Jesus, again, who was God in the flesh, experienced a wide range of emotions during his 33 years on this earth. And scripture told us with great specifics how Jesus felt, what he experienced, and how he experienced his public ministry. And we also learn that there are ways to take care of ourselves because Jesus modeled that when he stepped away from crowds to find restoration and to commune with his heavenly Father. And so we sometimes think that being unemotional is the right path as believers, or we think that it's not okay or permissible to acknowledge some of the things that we've talked about today: despair, self-harm, suicide. God's got it. We don't need to talk about it. But being unemotional or not acknowledging those things does not equate to being more spiritual, right?
Mm,
What is spiritual is acknowledging that those things exist. Jesus talks about anxiety probably 365 times, right? So that's every day of the week. There's a word in the Bible about anxiety. There's a word in the Bible about fear. So many passages that we can point to. So what scripture clearly shows, again, looking at Jesus as the model, is that Jesus exercised a healthy amount of emotion and also self-management, self-control, self-regulation, which is really the
uh-huh.
focus of my newest book that we'll talk
Mm,
later. But just finally, if you are someone that's listening and you do wonder, gosh, should I acknowledge anxiety? Should I acknowledge despair? If I do, does that mean that I don't have enough faith? No, God, being omniscient, understood that we as humans would face all of these things in this broken world, right? In this world, that there will be trouble and there will be grief, there will be loss, there will be rejection, abandonment. So, therefore, God, being omniscient, included so many passages in the Bible that address how we are to cope with these very real emotions that Jesus, God, who walked on this earth, also experienced. And my favorite one is cast all of your
mm,
anxieties
yes,
on him. Why? Not just because he loves us, but he cares for us. Brother Jason, he cares for us. And so we just
absolutely.
trust and we lean on his care.
Mm. Dr. Chinwe, I was about to ask the band if they could start playing softly. So, folks, she not only that was a wonderful answer. I love that breakdown. Jesus was it is our ultimate example, and he was God in the flesh, and so he experienced things in the body, his will, his emotions, all that. So I love that. Point us back to Jesus. Now, Dr. Chenway, I haven't been exactly honest with our audience. I have already predetermined that Dr. Chenway's coming back for another episode, and she teased something. I don't know. I just happen to have this thing on my desk. She has a second book that she has agreed to come back for a second episode, and we're going to deep dive here. It's called Calm, Courageous, and Connected: A Parent's Guide to Raising Emotionally Resilient Kids. To say, I don't know if books can be considered meals, Dr. Chenway, but I got to tell you, the title alone was like, do we have 3 more hours? So, is there anything you want to say as a teaser to set us up for when you come back for part two?
Yes, this is not just a parenting book. This is not just about if your kid does this, this is what you do. There are plenty of parenting books. I didn't want to write just another parenting books. This is a book. This is a book or a manual, an encouragement, a devotion for parents who and caregivers and teachers and leaders who want to help kids feel stronger in this broken world where they're getting messages and not trusting in the gifts and talents that God has given them. They're sometimes leaning into these messages that tell them who they aren't. I break down anxiety, perfectionism, supporting a child who is neurodivergent, ADHD, autism is on the rise. But I also really speak directly to parents. I have 2 chapters that talk about building and strengthening your own resilience. I'm very transparent in the book about some of the things that I've gone through. My husband and I, as our family, and we know that modern parents, adults right now, are experiencing higher levels of stress than previous generations. So, how do we help others? I'm talking to ministry leaders, I'm talking to teachers, when it sometimes feels like our resilience has hit a wall. So, again, this is not just your typical parenting book. I really wanted it to be a guide and a word of encouragement.
I love it. Folks, you heard it directly from the author. That's Dr. Chenway's teaser for our part two. So we'll work out on the calendar when she can come back. But please know, a lot like the Marvel movies, when it says that the Avengers will return, know that Dr. Chinwe Williams will return to the Fortified Life podcast. So you all stay tuned. Dr. Chinwe, I can't even begin to tell you how awesome this time that we had together. You really gave us a lot of nuggets and wisdom. You broke down just the mental health space of what people in general, and especially our youth, are experiencing. So thank you for lending your time and your talent and helping us navigate probably just the invisible battle that many are fighting day to day and with mental health issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful platform. And thank you for allowing God to use you, Brother Jason.
Thank you. And folks, that's all we've got time for here on the Fortified Life. Once again, this has been a tools and resources episode. We were talking about Dr. Chenway's book that she co-authored with Will Hutcherson, Seen, Dealing Despair, or sorry, Healing, Seen, Healing Despair and Anxiety in Kids and Teens Through the Power of Connection. Dr. Chenway, where can people go get a copy of the book?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon, and you can also go directly to my website, drchinwewilliams.com, where you'll see a ton of other resources and just information about me and how to connected with me.
I love it. And folks, I encourage you, please follow Dr. Chinway and everything she's up to. She already gave us a teaser of other things she's working on, her travels to Senegal and Hong Kong. So please make sure you support what she's doing. Get your copy of Seen. And next time, like the Baptists used to do with service transitions, Dr. Chinway, the next voice that you will hear on part two, Dr. Chinwe Williams talking about calm, courageous, and connected, a parent's guide to raising emotionally resilient kids. Dr. Chinwe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, that's all we have time for on the Fortified Life podcast. You know how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll have all of Dr. Chenway's information in the show notes. Be blessed, and we'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.